Well, greetings to you. I return to the subject of inflation today. Just a word or two about inflation. The thing that's prompted that is the Financial Times just a few days ago came out with a headline that inflation had fallen by 1.5%. Well, I don't know where they get their figures or what the Financial Times is getting up to these days. Gone to the dogs, I rather fancy. However, I think the point is that anybody watching this clip knows that's bullshit. Because almost everything you pay for now, not everything, but almost everything you pay for now is more expensive than it was last year, and significantly more expensive than it was 2 or 3 years ago. Now, there's all sorts of economic theories and excuses that are made by people who cause inflation, which is, generally speaking, bankers and politicians together. There was no inflation after the Napoleonic Wars, which finished in 1816, the Battle of Waterloo, and by 1817 or 18, I think it was, we went on to the gold standard, or back onto the gold standard in point of fact. And this little chap here is a sovereign. And we had no inflation then. Inflation stopped because the bankers and the politicians couldn't actually inflate it because there's only so many of these you can dig out of the ground, these little chaps. So I make the case again. If you say the stable diet, or the stable commodity was bread in the 1800s, which I think it was, the price of bread was the same in 1817 or 18 as it was in 1913-14 when the Great War was unfortunately started. Now, there were some spikes in between, and historians will always remind you that there was one or two sort of sidewinders within there. But broadly speaking, it was stable and it was the same price all that time later, nearly 100 years later. And if you take the commodity of the 20th century, I think I would argue, you might disagree, but is oil. So oil was the staple commodity of the 20th century. And if you look at the barrels of oil priced in gold, relatively stable, not based in paper currency, but it shows you that gold doesn't inflate. It's not an investment, but it doesn't degrade. It will still buy you what it used to buy you in the days of yesteryear. And this little fellow here is dated 1912. Now, that sovereign in 1912 would buy you bed and breakfast in a decent hotel in Paris or Berlin or New York or London. Decent hotel, bed and breakfast. And it will do the same today because this little chap now is worth just under £500. So it stood the test of time. And it will in 100 years' time. But it's not an investment. For those of you who sometimes write to me and say, oh, I did better in this and I did better in that. Gold isn't an investment. Gold is money, and it's a stable source of money, and that's what you've got to understand. Not an investment. Now let's just have a look at see what I've got here. This is a £5 note. When I was a kid, this was a very important piece of kit. I can tell you that really was. It's just quite amazing what it would buy you. Given that a pint of bitter was a shilling, now this £5 note will buy you a pint of bitter, and in London it won't even buy you a pint. And indeed, I think York won't buy you a pint. So this paper money becomes worthless over time. It degrades and degrades and degrades and becomes utterly worthless. So that's the long and short of it. Now, when it comes to inflation, price increases, whether it's on the high street or whether it's price increases in assets, it doesn't really matter. And we've seen massive increase inflation of house prices, for example. So house prices, generally speaking, tend over the long period to balance against inflation. Fair enough. So does perhaps to a certain extent agricultural land, although that wouldn't work for the 1800s. But leaving that aside, that's broadly how it works. So I, for example, this year, and you've all got your own experiences, and the fascinating thing about it is inflation. Inflation for me won't be the same as inflation for you. I'm an old geezer now, so inflation for me is one thing. If you're early middle age with kids and all the rest of it, inflation for you will be something else. And if it's school fees or college fees, that's shooting up much faster than the cost of living even. So it depends who you are. And if you're a student and you can get yourself into the student bar for a few pints, you're okay too. You're protected for the time being. So it's different for everybody. And I just made a little note because it's that time of year now. In 2 years, my car insurance has gone up round about 90%. My house insurance just in the last year has gone up by 28%. Chocolate bars the other day, I wanted to get a plain chocolate bar. That had gone up, that had doubled in the co-op. Co-op chocolate doubled. It's gone from round about £1 to round about £2. That's 100%. So these are the problems that we have. So we know that we're being told bullshit by the Financial Times. And of course, the Financial Times does exactly what the banks and the politicians want. You will never get the truth out of mainstream media. But you've already, if you're watching me on this clip, you already know that. So I would ask you just to be very careful when it comes to inflation. Yes, gold is good. Gold is good. And if you go to my website, you'll find out all about gold. It's the biggest independent website on gold in the country. It's totally independent. You don't have to pay for it. You just go through it and all your questions will be answered in, minutiae. All the questions will be answered. In a few days' time, Alistair MacLeod will be my guest on my channel, and we're going to go into a little bit more depth globally on what's happening to gold globally, which will help you. But don't forget, what's happening globally means it's going to happen to this. So if the Russians are buying, the Chinese are buying, the Indians are buying, and the price is going up, and it is, it's going to affect you holding these little chaps. I told you all this 10 years ago, for those who've been following me for that long, and these little chaps have now doubled in price. You can write and thank me if you want to, if you took my advice. You can also get my book, The Magic of Banking, which you'll find access to on my website, which will tell you about banking and all the other things that you need to know to protect your family. And whatever money you've been able to hide from the government, rapacious governments. So they're all the things you need to be thinking about. And if you're going to buy a significant number of these titles, if you're in a fortunate position to buy a significant number and you want them and a lock-up, don't use a bank. Don't use a bank. A lot of the banks are owned by the government, and they're the biggest kleptocracy you've ever seen. Politicians and banks. So get it if you don't want it in your house. Make sure that you go to a reputable lock-up, safe deposit box, and there are plenty of them, and there'll be one in your big town. There'll be one in your big town. That's what I've done. One other thing that's just come up, and we haven't had the budget yet. But I've smelt the wind. They're saying, "Oh, make sure that if you give your kids anything, if it's in the last 7 years, it's liable for inheritance tax." I think that what it means is that's not new. It's always been the same. What it actually does mean is that they're going to clamp down on giving stuff to kids. So you need an audit trail. Now I've got a number of youngsters in my family, and I'm old now. I don't know how long I'm going to last on the planet, but I've given away most of my gold coins to the youngsters in my family with an audit trail. With an audit trail. You need to show, your estate will need to show to the taxman when you gave it, how you gave it, acknowledgements, so on and so forth. So just bear that one in mind. But I say again, gold isn't an investment, it's a protection of wealth. All right, that's why your financial advisor doesn't like it because it takes the money off the table. And bankers and financial advisors, they want the money on the table so they can take their weak cut. So just bear all these things in mind. And if you look with me in talking to Alistair MacLeod, you'll find out what's going on globally. Good luck with it. And thanks very much for your messages which you send me. They are much appreciated. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.